Hi, it's Ipie, and happy Halloween! Sorry. But yeah, I might not be able to see anything around me, but the vibes here in the void seem a tad spookier than usual, which is really saying something. But anyways, I figured that for the sake of tradition, I would tell you all a spooky story. I hope you're ready. It was a dark and stormy Halloween evening when a man was found writhing and seething, where he had witnessed foul stories of dread, which he can't recite because now he is dead. Well, that wasn't very good at all. Why did it have to rhyme? But that's okay, because I have the internet, and the internet is full of interesting, high-quality stories. I'll just steal some from there. On an unrelated note, I have a strange craving for spaghetti. Creepypastas, an internet cuisine staple. If you spent more than 3 seconds on the internet, I'm sure that you've seen pictures like this, or even this. I really hate that last one. These are all associated with creepypastas, which at the roots are internet horror stories, many akin to folktales and urban legends in their presentation. Some are sinister, some are supernatural, and some are stupid. Just really, really stupid. I, like many, had a creepypasta phase when I was younger. As a kid, I was always lured in by the mysterious and unsettling, despite being a massive wuss, so I never delved too far into the world of horror. Still haven't, honestly. And besides, the majority of my creepypasta experience was from a more cynical angle. Honestly, it was probably a defense mechanism. But from my understanding, the culture of creepypastas at the time was kind of negative in general, so as some kind of strange divine comeuppance of some sort, I've decided to give the most popular ones a shot retrospectively, to see if they're really as mediocre as I initially thought. So welcome one and all to the Ipie Show's pasta extravaganza. I hope you brought extra parmesan, because we will begin with the most infamous creepypasta of all time. The one, the only. Ask anyone what story they think of when they first hear the word creepypasta, and it's practically guaranteed that the first name they'll say is Jeff the Killer. Look at this handsome guy. You think he wouldn't be this popular with his award-winning smile? His tale is the flagship creepypasta story, which is strange because it's pretty bad. And that's not even me being an asshole. The original story was written in 2011 and was taken down because it didn't meet the standards of the website. This may or may not become a theme. There was a remake in 2015 to appease the people who kept re-uploading the original story, but I'll be discussing the original, in summary of course. So Jeff and his brother Lou are new into... Sorry, what? It doesn't start with that? Oh. Pardon me then. We open with an excerpt from a local news article. A serial killer is on the loose. The assailant attacked a young child with intentions to kill, but thankfully was briefly held off by said child until the father ran in to chase the perpetrator off. Who's the perpetrator, you may ask? Why, it's none other than our main character, Jeff. I have many problems with this introduction. First of all, why newspaper? The whole in media res thing in any story is somewhat contentious as it is, and this story shows one of the many reasons why. In medias res is typically used to build either dramatic irony or cheap stakes, of which this does neither effectively. Because not only does this attack have nothing to do with the rest of the story, we already know that Jeff is going to turn out this way because it's the title of the whole story. Second of all, he wasn't able to apprehend a child? Isn't he like a pubescent with super strength? I feel like even in normal circumstances this would be able to turn out in his favor. And finally, the language used is very stale. I know this is kind of nitpicky of me, but I needed a third example for dramatic effect. These issues show up throughout the entirety of the story, the stale language being a particularly prominent problem at some points. This following excerpt isn't the norm, but I sure do find it funny. He sat there looking at his ceiling, and suddenly he got a weird feeling. Not so much pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as some random feeling. Once again, kind of an isolated incident, but there are certainly smaller and similar grammatical errors throughout the pasta. Actually, let's take note of that on this very conveniently placed creepypasta-themed trope board. Bad grammar and spelling. A lot of creepypastas, even the popular ones, have dubious grammar choices. This is likely because creepypastas were predominantly popular among a younger, prepubescent crowd, causing me to feel kind of bad for bringing it up in the first place. Moving on. Most people know the story at this point, but in case you don't, Jeff's family moves into a new, more well-off neighborhood at the beginning of the story. On the way to school, Jeff and his brother Lou get jumped by some older kids. Jeff proceeds to kick all their asses. This naturally upsets them, so they call the cops. Though in self-defense, Jeff is very clearly the one who beat up these kids, but Lou shows up with a knife and some self-inflicted wounds and is like, "Nah bro, it's totally me," and everyone just kinda goes with it. This might be because Jeff came away from the encounter with the bullies unscathed for some reason. Anyway, there's a kid's birthday party that the family is immediately invited to, and there's a moment where Jeff's parents are very clearly overdressed, and when prompted to change, Jeff changes to a white hoodie and dress pants. I guess he needed to get into that iconic fit somehow. At said party, while having an admittedly wholesome encounter with some younger kids, it's a scene I legitimately enjoy the inclusion of. The bullies bust in to fight Jeff because they knew he was here. Apparently. Small world, I guess. One of them squares up to fight as the other two threaten everybody else in the room with guns. The parents do absolutely nothing to stop this or even protect their kids who are very actively in danger. Like, listen, I know they have guns and everything, but there's only 2 of them, and they're prepubescents, and they're distracted, and they're apparently very bad shots, because after Jeff punches one of the kids in the chest so hard that his heart stops, which is very possible apparently, they start shooting at him and just constantly miss. I always visualize this part as an old black and white slapstick bit. Anyway, Jeff once again kicks both their asses, grips on a towel rack, it's pretty sick, and as he's about to absolutely brutalize this kid, he points out that Jeff is covered in bleach and alcohol and proceeds to light him on fire. Wow, what a middle schooler. Respect. So while Jeff is burning alive, the adults who were still just standing around downstairs apparently through all this must have decided to actually get up and do something because Jeff wakes up in the hospital. While there, he's informed that the one surviving kid admitted to jumping Jeff, releasing Lou from imprisonment. All's well that ends well. Except for the 2 kids that Jeff murdered. One thing is left to be revealed, however, which of course is Jeff's disfigured Freddy Krueger face. When the wraps are removed, everyone in the room is horrified. Jeff, wanting to look for himself, runs into the bathroom. This is the following description. He looked in the mirror and saw the cause of the distress. His face, it's horrible. His lips were burnt a deep shade of red. His face was turned to a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. He slowly put his hand to his face. It had a sort of leathery feel to it now. Jeff is weirdly elated by this new look and proceeds to laugh hysterically. His mom is concerned, but the doctor says that this is typical behavior. Quote, if his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here and we'll give him a psychological test. Jeff kills his family that night. Good work, Doc. This whole killing your whole family thing was probably because Jeff has apparently quote-unquote snapped by this point. And if him doing his best Joker impression wasn't clear enough, he cuts off his eyelids and carves a permanent smile in his mouth. It's kind of funny actually, because his mom sees this and instead of, I don't know, calling a doctor to prevent blindness and infection, she merely thinks, oh yeah, this kid has to die. So that's why Jeff kills his parents. He also kills Lou, for some reason. But don't think about that, he's crazy. Woo. With that gripping ending, we can now add a new entry to the Creepypasta trope board. Patent pending. A complete misunderstanding and mishandling of mental illness, trauma, and other miscellaneous elements, events, and taboo topics. You think murder is bad? Well, that's horsey garbage. We're talking suicide, abuse, self-harm, assault, you name it, a creepypasta has that as a motivation. Motivation is in heavy quotes, of course. Jeff the Killer, while not featuring anything especially heavy, is in my opinion the ball of crimson yarn at the start of this thread. Jeff's conveniently ambiguous feeling is treated as a power-up, something that makes him cool, especially since he's not even held remotely responsible for the murder of his 2 assailants. It's not even mentioned in the rest of the story, I don't think. And it isn't like you can't include mental illness in a horror story. The point of mental illness and trauma in 2017's hit psychological horror game Doki Doki Literature Club is used to surprise the player with more realistic depictions of mental illness and their depressing impacts, to contrast the expectations of its, for lack of a better word, flowery false genre. Hell, in games like Omori and Lisa, it's the whole point. In most of these stories, it's just kinda gross. It's more so glorified than explored, if that makes sense. This glorification of mental illness, whether for shock value, sympathy, or motive, is incredibly common in creepypastas of this era. Ooh, also hold on to that shock value thing, it'll become important later. Anyways, I realize I spent a lot of time talking about this very well-known pasta. The other ones will go faster, I promise. But the reason why I've done so is to explain what I'd look for in creepypastas and other scary stories. The reason why Jeff and other similarly formatted creepypastas aren't scary to me is because, much like campfire stories and legends, creepypasta's closest analog, they're often told as if they're real. Hell, him crossing over with Slenderman, the archetypical urban legend pasta, seems to imply that people certainly took it that way. But to me, campfire stories and legends are kind of different things, but just slightly. Legends are plausible and by extension scary by reaching exaggerated conclusions based on knowledge, while campfire stories are plausible and by extension scary for the lack of it. Or at least that's what I've noticed in my experience. I was mostly just using it as an analog to explain the known and unknown in horror. Merriam-Webster might have some words to say to me about that, but nonetheless. In my eyes, Jeff the Killer is like a legend and a campfire story had a weird love child and genetics rolled snake eyes. Despite the modern and somewhat grounded setting, nothing that happens in the story makes any goddamn sense. From the way our characters adds to the unexplained inhuman feats of our edgy white boy preteen protagonist, it doesn't really fit within our known reality. so it can't be a spooky legend. And Slenderman makes for a better campfire story anyway, despite being called an urban legend, because in his original form, he was just a bunch of weird pictures. The fact that he was ambiguous at first was what made him appealing and scary. Jeff's story is far too detailed. Too much specific information is featured in the story. So, it's not a really good campfire story either. I feel like that identity crisis of being too grounded to be unknown horror, but not grounded enough to be known horror, kind of is to the story's detriment. Which brings us to... To me, lost media has always been sort of terrifying in a more abstract way. At least compared to crazed serial killers. What could they be hiding, damn it? No, but seriously, creepypastas are an early spawn of the internet, and I'd assume that chronicling lost media wasn't nearly as prevalent then as it is today. I mean, it certainly was being done, but these days you can't go 2 swipes without learning about a TV episode lost to time. There may very well have been an actual mindset of what if there was a messed up TV show that we just didn't know about, especially when episodes like that really did exist, though obviously to a much lesser degree. Now, there are some creepypastas like Cannibal Cove that make up the lost media, and that's the premise of the story. The ones that I find the most interesting are the lost media pastas that make up episodes for an existing franchise. There are 2 very prevalent examples of this, Suicide Mouse and Squidward Suicide. See what I mean about the whole suicide thing? Actually, screw it. Put that on the creepypasta trope board. Patent still pending. Suicide. Just suicide. It's such a big part of creepypastas that it might as well be its own entry. I already kind of went over why this is a problem. Anyways, both of these are somewhat similar in structure. Our narrator introduced the subject of choice and describes the lost media. Being lost media based on TV shows, there are recreations of sorts on YouTube. From what I found, the suicidemouse.avi video found here came out at around the same time as the pasta. The video is fine. Generally, I have a weak stomach for analog horror, and this might be the earliest example of that. Honestly, it's not a wonderful origin. It kinda looks like someone just learned how to use Premiere Effects. The streaming isn't too great to listen to. I like the guy at the end. I do not know why he is there. Nonetheless, I stan. Squidward Suicide also has video recreations, but I don't think they're as linked to the original story as this one. Anyway, back to the actual written story. Suicidemouse.avi came out first, so I'll start there. So, do any of you remember those Mickey Mouse cartoons from the 1930s? Was Disney history not well known in 2009? I know that he says that the DVD releases are only a few... Goddamn. Listen, I know I'm being pedantic, but I just hate hooks like this. Anyway, according to sources, the actual film wasn't very special, just a loop of Mickey Mouse walking to the sound of a banging piano. Many just thought the tape cut to black and nothing else weird happened, but that was until 2 years prior to the posting, when Leonard Maltin, who was an actual, real guy, reviewed the footage and a copy was sent to the author by an acquaintance of Maltin. This is that source's report. After said cut to black, the video gets distorted and Mickey starts smirking. The sidewalk distorts and a gurgling sound plays and starts to get louder. As time goes on, the gurgling turns into an anguished scream, and the video gets more wave-warped. Mickey's face falls apart and he begins displaying a wide, cruel smile. This is when, quote, colors were happening that shouldn't have been possible at the time. The buildings become floating rubble, and the sidewalk distorts into directions beyond human understanding. Then it cuts to a normal Mickey Mouse end card with some broken music. Walton leaves the room and tells some random guy to watch the last 30 seconds, to which he does, comes out, says, real suffering is not known, and shoots himself. There are a few notes I have here, but I'll get back to them after I talk about Squidward. Squidward Suicide is sometimes also referred to as Red Mist, which is an objectively better name. The Lost Media Creepypasta wiki marks Red Mist specifically as a continuation of Squidward Suicide, but it looks the same to me. It just includes some weird extra lore that connects it to Suicide Mouse, despite Suicide Mouse supposedly being created by Walt Disney, so I have no idea what they're talking about here. I'll try to get through this one fast because, as I mentioned, it's similar enough to Suicide Mouse, in which a group of people sit down to watch a spooky tape and weirdness happens in between. It's also a bit longer as well. Also, this one is darker. You'll see. You read the warning, right? Alright, sick. So this pasta starts out by saying that he doesn't know what the hell happened. In my opinion, a significantly better hook than, say, you ever heard of that Mickey Mouse fella? The author goes on to say that he was an unpaid intern at Nickelodeon, and because of that, they worked very closely with the animators and editors. He was in the editing room to prepare the final cut of an episode with animators and audio editors when the Squidward Suicide title card shows up. Everyone brushes this off as a joke, as it's common for editors to pull pranks like this. Certainly there's no need to question why it's in the final cut. The episode starts, and SpongeBob and Patrick are laughing outside Squidward's window as he's practicing for his clarinet solo. The day of the concert arrives, and after his performance, Squidward is booed off the stage. Here's where we get our first mention of red, hyper-realistic eyes. Ooh. I really like the slide here. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. You're all idiots. At this point, all sound cuts, and Squidward is sitting on his bed with his tentacles on his head. He begins to cry. Trees are rustling in the background, the camera zooms in really, really damn slow. Like, Jesus, you sat through all that? Squidward's crying starts to sound real. Too real for the speakers in the studio. Trees are rustling louder. Faint laughing is heard in the background. An image flashes on screen, and the author begins to graphically describe the corpse of a dead child. I'll get to it, hold on. So from here, things are kinda standard. Like Suicide Mouse, the noises get louder and the visuals more weird. Squidward starts crying hyper-realistic blood from his hyper-realistic eyes. Wind's blowing harder, laughter is louder. There's 2 more dead kids. Why? By the time that everyone sees the 3rd dead kid, the sound guy's like, you know what we should do? Show this to more people, and calls in Stefan Hillenberg, who apparently had nothing else better to do. The sound guy once again plays a video, and a few minutes later, Squidward shoots himself with a shotgun. Now this makes Hillenberg very angry, so he demands to watch the whole thing, and as it's replaying, some people, including the author, just stick around. Sure. Obviously, the footage is analyzed, to which it discovered that it was apparently edited only 24 seconds prior to its viewing. And that's the end. Okay, Jesus Christ, where do I start? I'll start off easy with our next addition to the Creepypasta trope board, patent acquired. Hyper-realism. This is so common, not only in lost media creepypastas, but other genres as well. We'll get into it. I'll also throw in what I'll call impossible media, where visuals and sound are made beyond what is possible given the hardware or the time period. It's in both of these stories. Suicide Mouse, man, I've been saying suicide more than this video than I've ever said in my life. Suicide Mouse had the colors in the black and white film, and the sidewalk that moves in directions beyond human understanding. Didn't know Walt Disney was a Lovecraft fan. And Squidward Suicide is where hyperrealism truly made its creepypasta debut, as well as the sounds that seem to come from outside of the speakers. I really dislike this trope. It gives what could be an otherwise interesting and potentially scarily real concept weirdly supernatural elements. This trope bleeds into haunted cartridge pastas too, but I'll discuss that when we get there. I feel like I've said that too much recently. There's a lot of overlap in creepypastas. I also dislike the whole images and /or sounds of quality beyond the possibility of our equipment, because honestly, I don't give a damn if your speakers are haunted. A ghost can't make a speaker suddenly have better sound quality. I'm pretty sure that's not how audio hardware works. And if it is, how do I get a ghost to haunt my microphone? I have a bit more to say here, so it's a perfect time to remind you that I am not by any means a writer. All of my jabs and otherwise sarcastic comments are all in jest, and criticism comes from a place of a handful of years in amateur analysis. Nothing is meant as harassment, of course. Though these stories are so old, I'm sure most authors are long past these works by now. I'd bring up my amateur history of analysis, because I'm potentially about to make some very broad strokes about how good horror is written, despite my aversion to the genre. And I may live to regret this opinion, because our 5th entry in the Creepypasta trope board, patent revoked, is gore and shock value. This is mostly in reference to Squidward's slumber party. To try to explain what I mean, here's an example. Which would you prefer I do to effectively scare you as an observer? Would you rather I show you a hallway? It's dark. So dark you can barely make out the color of the wall. The hallway is lined with doors, each closed, and as you check them, they're all locked. Suddenly, you hear a noise. It sounds like the impact of a blunt object hitting raw meat. Take a step forward, and you hear it again. Closer, on your left, further ahead. Take a few more steps, you hear it again. Closer still. As you approach the noise, you begin to see a faint, flickering light. It's coming from a crack in the side of a singular door. You hear the sound again. It's coming from this door. You begin to realize that something smells awful, like rotten milk and burnt plastic. You look down. There's blood leaking under the door. The pool grows and grows until it reaches your feet. You're standing in front of the door now. The smell is stronger, the noise is louder, much louder, and you can pick apart the distinct sounds of wood hitting flesh and bone breaking at this distance. Your hand touches the cold doorknob. It twists, opening the door to reveal the horrors behind. Or would you prefer that I blow this kitty's head off with an explosive planted in its collar? Now, I would typically expect that people would have a more immediate and guttural reaction to the fact that I even said that I'd blow up a small cat. But that's all I would expect. And it's probably less horror and more just general disgust with the fact that I even brought it up. Despite both examples including gore of some kind, I would say that the first example, despite admittedly being kinda generic, is a lot better as a horror concept because there's a build-up. I can also ask a lot more questions about the first. What is this place? What's making the noise? Why are there all these doors and why are they locked? Why is it so dark as well? Certainly other people are behind these doors, someone had to have locked them after all, so why is no one doing anything? For the cat, well, it's pretty cut and dry. There's no explosive in this collar for the record. I don't even know how the cat got in here, to be honest. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that Squidward suicides the cat. Yeah, there are questions, who took these pictures, why, how did they get in the studio, but I could be asking the same question without the dead kids. And despite there being detail, way too much of it in fact, The gory depictions of mutilated children don't scare me that much, especially on the second and third time around. In fact, the only thing that comes remotely close to scare me is the fact that the author took the time to write this. And this concept is not bad. The disturbing title card could have been brushed off as a joke like it is in the actual story, and then smaller things happening throughout the tape could have tipped off the viewers that something is clearly wrong. And also, so much of Squidward's suicide seems so disjointed. Not only do the dead kids stick out weirdly, but so does the howling wind against the trees and the laughter, as there's no source or reason behind either. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and noises that keep growing in volume with no relation to anything else going on and no reason as to why aren't scary, especially in written media. Squidward's death has nothing to do with the laughter or the wind at all, and them getting louder doesn't mean a whole lot. Are they getting closer? What is it? Whatever it is, it clearly doesn't have to do with the fact that he killed himself, so what's the point? I know this and my talking about Jeff's identity crisis are devolving into mass critique, but that's because these issues are prevailing through a lot of creepypastas. It's as if they aren't interested in scaring you with careful scares that are internally consistent, and more that they just want to shock you with sudden dark themes and dead people. Dead people aren't scary, what are they gonna do, kill me? That took way too long. What's next? This is sort of a subset of lost media creepypasta, but more explicitly supernatural. I've historically never really liked much of the spooky haunted game pastas. As I mentioned, they often also use hyper-realistic blood/eye/voice as I mentioned before, and my wise ass would always write a snarky entry on the creepypasta trope board. Please give me my patent back. As if a story about a haunted game cartridge housing the embodiment of the devil himself was grounding itself in reality to begin with. However, one of the originators of this subgenre also happens to be from one of my favorite franchises, so I would like to introduce to you all. Despite being not only the biggest Zelda creepypasta, but probably the most influential creepypasta out there, I haven't really experienced Ben Drowned for myself. It seems to be part forum thread, part web series, part ARG. That sounds sick. I'll just mosey on over to the official wiki and Jesus Christ! Why are there 3 versions of the story? Listen, this is a lot. Even for me. The way this story goes is pretty standard to start anyway, so I guess I'll just talk about the beginning. However, before I get to that, one thing I didn't know was that there's a prologue with Rosa, an interesting video that, from what I understand, is legitimately part of a game. I find that incorporating actual known weirdness with games when making a horror story about it makes it seem a lot more grounded, though in this case, it's a completely different game. I honestly don't know what Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines has to do with The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, but it's a neat touch nonetheless. Our story starts confusingly with an entry titled Day 4. This story is told with a mix of traditional posts and videos, the videos probably being the most infamous part. I found the story to be disappointingly standard at first. Guys feeling nostalgic, gets a lot of old games, and a creepy old guy gives them one for free. Cue horror standard negligence. However, in defense of this story in particular, it's important to keep in mind that Ben Drowned is the originator of many of these tropes and framing devices. In general, it can be hard looking back on early influential media with modern media in mind. The premise of buying an old game that's super messed up is really fun. It's just kind of a shame how many stories focus on the more dull aspects of this one, because there is plenty to enjoy here. Our oblivious protagonist finds there to already be a save file, Ben. Probably the kid the old man mentioned earlier. Side note, I like the detail that the old man said goodbye Ben, but was mistaken for goodbye then. No particular reason why, I just thought it was really cool. Weird things start happening almost immediately, as the NPCs start calling the player Ben despite this game being played on a completely separate save file named Link. Naturally, this is brushed off as a bug, and the Ben save file is deleted. Now the NPCs call the player nothing but blank space. How charming. After putting the game down, the player picks up the next day and attempts the glitch called the Day 4 glitch, an actual glitch you can perform in Majora's Mask. This is a significantly better implementation of what I mentioned earlier with Rosa, thanks in no small part to the fact that it's about the game in question. After the glitch is performed, all hell breaks loose. A bunch of stuff glitches out, loading into the completely wrong room, text appearing suddenly out of place, and the happy mask salesman appearing briefly as the player tries to drown himself. I don't think I need to explain why that might be important. During all this, the player is having some very intense reactions. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe they're ghost emotions. The end of it all is the infamous moment where Link just catches on fire while facing down Skull Kid. Creepy save files ensue. End of Act 1 Part 1. So overall, pretty good start. I'll say right off the bat that I really like how everything here is actually used in the game. From suspiciously thematic dialogue to glitches. Most people know this already, but the footage you're seeing is legitimately Majora's Mask, just hacked to be corrupted to hell. That means that everything done here is technically done within the confines of the game, though I'm close to certain that a handful of moments, pretty much all the iconic ones, are stitched together in post. But this aspect of the pasta is really cool, because it completely removes the more absurd supernatural aspects found in similar pastas, like hyperrealism, pulling the player's soul into the game, stuff like that. The only thing I find kind of weird so far is the player's reaction. He mentions not usually being so emotional, and I don't see how what he perceives to be just a really glitchy game, no matter how haunted it might be in actuality, is able to elicit such an uncharacteristically intense emotional reaction. But then again, I'm not a ghost expert. They don't seem to like me too much. But anyway, this is a really great start to this surprisingly long series. Jeez, it only ended a year ago. I think I'll stop discussion about Ben Drowned here. I know I gave a really brief summary, but I think I need to look over the whole story by itself before going any deeper. I'd be more than happy to dig further in depth some other time. If anybody's interested, that is. Besides, there's still plenty of other haunted game cartridge creepypastas out there. Who knew ghosts love games so much? Another early example is... Imagine being a kid who grew up with the NES and while trying to find games from your childhood, obviously Google NES Godzilla and find this monstrosity. This is another really early haunted cartridge story, but while Ben Drowned focused more on the glitch-like anomalies, the story of this haunted Godzilla Monster of Monsters cartridge, god what a stupid name, the 80s must have been a weird time, has complete alterations to the game, to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. Like there's this weirdly personal survey that's mentioned, though it's not really important to the overall story. Accompanying the story is some legitimately really well done pixel art, like even some of the weird stuff feels at home on the NES. And because of this, there's no hyperrealism to be found. We're on a good streak, that's 2 for 2 baby. The story itself starts normally, at least by creepypasta standards. Guy gets his hand on childhood game, weird stuff starts happening, and it messes with him a bit. Most of the story consists of weird stuff that slowly starts happening, big drops of unsettling imagery, rinse and repeat. It's a tried and true system, but there's a bit of a twist around halfway through. So, the protagonist had a girlfriend in middle school who had bizarre episodes that caused her to act very strangely. At one point, she froze up and then proceeded to run headfirst into traffic, only to get killed by a truck. And now her soul is trapped in this copy of Godzilla Monsters and Monsters, along with the demon that possessed her, Red. This is kind of a strange twist. It does add a bit to the overall story, as the plot point of her soul being trapped ends up creating some psychological torment in later chapters, as well as a more emotionally satisfactory conclusion, but it mostly serves to make the plot a bit more ridiculous in my opinion. Many others seem to think the author kinda jumped the shark with this, as it was a pretty standard fare to start. The sudden nature of this reveal definitely doesn't do the story much favors either, and the way it doesn't come up until like halfway through the story makes me think it was a decision made halfway through writing. Actually, I'll add this to another entry to the Creepypasta trope board. I pray that the VPSTL will one day return my calls. As traumatic backstory elements either appearing early in the story for quick sympathy or jarringly exposited halfway through is a somewhat common theme, typically done with little grace. In this case, nah. The idea of a demon choosing to reside in a game cartridge has always been kinda strange to me, and to push it further by saying that this demonic entity is eternally trapping a loved one is, honestly, kinda fresh. Yeah, it's convoluted and a little bit absurd, but at least it's absurd in an interesting way. Although in this case, it really teeters the line of being poor implementation of mental illness, so despite the story doing a triple axle over a shark, I feel like it still sticks to landing. Okay, so that went a bit off the rails towards the end, but it's not like things get any more ridiculous. Please be Final Fantasy, please be Final Fantasy, please be fun. God damn it! Can I level with you for a second? I don't particularly like being negative. Sonic.exe may be one of the most infamous creepypastas out there, like on a meta level. It's not very good, and despite that, absurdly popular. It takes everything I lightly complained about in the earlier 2 entries and dials it up to 11. What's weird is that some of the most iconic parts of the story are taken from other games, like Kefka's laugh and Gygas' music from Earthbound, and they're described in the pasta. It wasn't something that the guy who made the fan game made up. And it's weird because, like, why? Like, from a story perspective, why? Is this demon a gamer? Even some of the most iconic lines and imagery are pretty generic, like, oh really? Your god, the creator of all things we do and do not know, is a demonic entity taking a form of a cartoon hedgehog that uses an old-ass video game as its catalyst? You know, normally I would quip about how absolutely bonkers that line is, but it actually cleared a few things up for me. That on top of the standard hyper-realistic yada and incredibly intense reactions for the player, it doesn't make for a particularly interesting story as well. And it's basically the same format as the previous 2 entries anyways. Fan of game, get game from friend, play game, game weird, nightmares, friend missing, play game again, repeat. It's pretty generic, I won't bore you with the details you probably already know. In fact, it was so generic it was removed to the Troll Pasta Wiki, as was the sequel, and the remake. And then, other stuff happened. I'm relatively certain that the only reason the story was popular to begin with was the fan game, as it was conveniently released during peak horror game reaction content on YouTube. So brief aside because I don't know where else to put this. I distinctly remember listening to a reading of a creepypasta where the POV character takes a break to watch Batman: The Dark Knight for some reason, and relatively verbose detail as well. And I could have sworn that it was from Sonic.exe, but I can't find any reference to it anywhere, so maybe it's a different pasta. If anyone listening knows what the hell I'm talking about, please let me know. Anyways, I'm done talking about these damn stories. Yes, I missed a lot. Yes, there's still plenty of good ones that actually might keep me up at night, but goddamn, I'm just so tired. I wasn't joking when I said I disliked being negative. It's honestly kind of exhausting. Now that I'm at the end of this journey, though, I have to wonder, why did I do this? Seriously, I started off by mentioning that I'm not even a massive horror guy, and I certainly am not a writer. What am I doing here? I worry my criticism and, well, I'll just be honest, nitpicking feeds the whole hating preteens for being creative in a preteen way kind of thing, which isn't my intention. Young creativity should be fostered, of course. Maybe the reason I'm so critical of these stories is because when I was a preteen, the mere idea of their existence scared me. Maybe that cynical phase really was a defense mechanism. Listen, I don't mean to hate on the people that wrote these stories. Many of these stories are almost a decade old now. Many of the writers have moved on from their creepypasta works and may not even associate with the community at all anymore. Be it that they moved on to write better works and improve their own writing, or just quit entirely. And I hope the latter isn't true. As much shade as I throw, especially towards certain stories, there's potential in every concept. The idea of creepy lost episodes of beloved cartoons have always been compelling. Haunted cartridges have certainly been done well, and I'm sure at least one Jeff the Killer clone leaned more into one side of my admittedly very confusingly defined known-unknown spectrum. The last thing I want is that this potential to be completely thrown out the window because of mean words said on the internet, especially if it's by my dumbass. If you're a writer or an artist or anyone that makes anything, you can always improve. Yeah, what you made might have sucked, or you may have had or lacked certain values that you regret and now it's locked on the internet forever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're that person anymore. You can write something better with the knowledge that you've gained from your failed endeavor, and you can always make something new and more meaningful to the person you are now. No one is a stagnant being, especially when it comes to their creativity, so keep on creating things in spite of what came before. And ideas themselves aren't stagnant either. Sonic.exe is basically the embodiment of that. And while I'm already on my soapbox, it's completely natural to be defensive when people are shitting all over your mind baby. And sometimes, it isn't fair, I get that. Your work may be a reflection of yourself, and an attack upon that can seem like an attack on you. But it isn't. Well, it kind of is. It's more of an attack on the snapshot of who you were when you made it. It's like the middle school yearbook photos. Who cares if you were a dweeb in 7th grade? You're a high school sophomore now. You're probably still a dweeb, but now you're a stronger dweeb. If your art's getting shit on now, keep going. Because for all you know, the next snapshot that's taken is better, even if only by a small margin. That was sappy as hell. Sorry if it was a bit disjointed. Being in the void has given me a lot of time to reflect, but even then, a lot of it's still kind of jumbled. Sentimental monologuing is typically a sign that I should shut my dumb mouth, so I hope...